I was encouraged by Keir's interview because he's clearly the most credible candidate to be Prime Minister on the Labour side. By lurch to the right, I think what he means is obviously we shouldn't become a pale imitation of the Conservatives. There's no point in having two Conservative parties in this country. The country's got to have a straight choice. I'm a democratic socialist. I believe in uniting the centre and the left in politics, which is what Tony Blair did so successfully. And I think Keir Starmer could be in that tradition. Now, he'll find his own style and his own policy mix and so on. But he has the first great requirement for being Prime Minister, which is that he's trusted on the doorstep. And I did
by whom?
The section. I didn't find
by whom? I mean, I can assure you right now. I mean, look, I think he's eminently more credible than Jeremy Corbyn, and indeed many other candidates in terms of he's a former director of public prosecutions. He's obviously a very clever man. He's a fantastic communicator. Would have loved to have had him on the Brexit side, but he's not going to be trusted by the 52% who voted for Brexit, is he? When he reneged on that promise.
Well, let's be clear. We're moving on from this. I mean,
I tell you, if you think Leave voters are going to forgive and forget, I think you should think again.
Well, as we saw up in the northeast, I mean, there are mining communities there who were the victims of Thatcher closing the pits down, and they voted for the Tory party.
That's exactly right, because those wounds will never fully heal to a lot of people, but it's time to move on from that. But that generation of people, Labour have always been able to count on them for the vote and thought, well, we're okay up north, we'll be fine up north.
Yeah.
But it's not the way anymore.
No.
And most people aren't going to be a dying out. Obviously, that's a horrible phrase. I don't mean that in a celebratory way. They're not going to be here forever. Like I said, my kids won't care that Thatcher closed the pits. I don't really care. I was born in 81.
Right.
So it's just before my time kind of thing. So,
and this has already happened to them in Scotland, because I watched them as I was working up in Scotland when the SNP started to gain a bit of a foothold. When they first got the sort of devolution, the Labour Party were in charge of the Scottish Parliament. But as the years went by, people started to work out that actually Labour had been in charge in Scotland for a long time, and they'd done nothing. The poor areas were still poor. The places where people were suffering, they were still suffering. Labour had been in charge for decades.
Yeah, this way of thinking that Labour's for the working man, it's utter tosh.
Yeah.
It's not been for the working man for a long, long time. It's just a complete joke. And if they've got some crucial decisions to make in the next, every day. If they make poor decisions, I mean, you get MPs still on talking as if it's party politics and it's a game.
Right.
It's not been about that. Ever since Brexit, all the parties should have just carbosh the whole us versus you kind of pathetic infighting and got things done for the sake of the country. But they're still talking as if it's just a little game between them. Like that guy before saying, we could be a pain, we could be a nuisance. Well, I'm sorry. It's not about that at the moment. We need to get the country sorted, get Brexit done.
Yeah.
And,
And isn't it pathetic that Corbyn says, we're going to vote against the withdrawal bill? Well, what's the point? It doesn't matter.
The electorate will remember that. The next time there's an election, they won't forget. He's still not getting the picture. They're not listening. And that's what's cost them.
Yeah.
It's cost them because they've just not listened.
The humility that comes with so many people putting their trust in us, many for the first time, is that we now need to deliver. And I know that, and I feel it very deeply. So I'm delighted that within less than a week, we're able to get going on announcing our first policy commitment to deliver on the goal, the commitment of having 50,000 more nurses in the NHS. And we're doing that by introducing a training grant so that anybody who wants to become a nurse from this September, the application deadline is the 15th of January, and you will know that you will get a £5,000 minimum training grant, up to £8,000 in certain specialties like mental health nursing, and if you need childcare, for instance, and in certain parts of the country. So we are recruiting more nurses to hit that goal, the commitment that we made in the general election.
OK, well, I mean, that's clear. Approximately 41,000 NHS nursing posts, that's 1 in 10, are currently vacant. And we know that one of the major reasons why they're vacant is the applications for nursing degrees have plunged. Why do they plunge? Oh, because the Tories axed the grants, which you just talked about. So back up to 2016, there was a bursary of up to £16,500, including tuition fees of about £9,000. So you're proposing to bring in bursaries once again, but actually at a lower rate for most people than they were previously entitled to. An awful lot of the policies that were announced by the government in the election campaign and going forward now are actually just basically making good on the things that have been created as problems in the last 9 years, replacing the 20,000 police officers who have lost, replacing the bursaries, replacing the nurses who have been lost. An awful lot of this is just sort of repairing the damage already done, isn't it?
No. It's a new government, that's for sure, and we are absolutely determined to tackle the problems that we face.
But you're tackling a problem that was created by the last Tory government.
No, because the number of nurses is increasing. In the last year, the number of nurses in the NHS increased by 5,000. That's great. There's 17,000 more nurses than there were in 2010. But we need to increase that number faster. So I understand the reasons why the decision was taken in the past. And what we're doing is making the decisions that are needed to tackle the problems that we face as a country now. And this training grant is more targeted than the previous policy. And where there are particular shortages, for instance, as I mentioned, in mental health nursing, then the grant will be higher. But the crucial thing is this: we have just been elected with a mandate and a majority to be able to deliver on the commitments that we made, and I'm determined to make that happen. And you can talk about the history as much as you like, and as I say, it's great that the number of nurses is increasing at the moment, but we made an assessment of what's needed. You mentioned actually the current number of vacancies. We made this. We think this is what the country needs. The Royal College of Nursing has welcomed it, which is good, and we're getting on with delivering what we promised.
And let's also talk about other issues we've got with in terms of healthcare workers in the NHS, which you have to deal with. 1 in 3 GPs in the last year have cut their hours. They say due to stress. They're saying millions of patients struggling to get appointments. This is according to a new report by the General Medical Council. They carried out a survey of more than 3,500 doctors. They a fifth are considering quitting within the next year. 1 in 10 have been signed off with stress. 2 in 5 felt unable to cope at least once a week. Have we got a bunch of snowflake younger doctors, or is something going horribly wrong?
No, we don't. We've got incredibly hard-working doctors, and we need more GPs as well. That's another commitment that we have in the manifesto that we're going to deliver on. The number of GPs was falling, and I've managed to stop that fall, and the number is now rising. But clearly there are significant pressures on GPs. We all know that. We're absolutely determined to fix that problem as well, and we will.
But in terms of how they work, as a daughter of a GP who worked very long hours, it seems to me it's a strange job after 250 grand's worth of training paid for largely by the taxpayer, other than their tuition fees, that actually people will be working part-time. Shouldn't there be a requirement, if you're trained by the British taxpayer and you go to work in the NHS, that you should work full-time?
Well, I definitely want people to be working full-time, and often GPs say that they'll go part-time in order to work what lots of people would regard as full-time. But there's a clear need to have more appointments available in primary care. We've got the commitment to delivering 50 million more, which is an increase of about a sixth in the number of appointments available. We could do that through a combination of more GPs, also more other primary care staff, because often when you go to the GP, you don't need to see a GP themselves. You can see a nurse or a physio or one of the other practice staff. Also, better use of technology. Many people want to have a consultation with their GP over the phone or over Skype or a video message, or by email. And often that is much better for the patient and certainly quicker for the GP. Now, your face-to-face GP appointment has always got to be available, of course it does. But let's have more GPs, but let's also embrace this modern technology, which makes so many parts of our lives easier.
Well, you've been very big on trying to actually bring technology and get rid of the fax machines.
I want to bring the NHS into the 21st century.
The 20th would be nice.
Well,
we'll accept that. Can I also talk to you about a bit of concern about thousands of women urging your Prime Minister and you yourself as the Health Secretary to end the hormone replacement therapy drugs shortage scandal? I'm a woman of 51, not quite there yet, but I imagine this is going to be a concern to me in a not short order. Why can't we get hold of HRT drugs?
Well, this is a very serious problem for some HRT drugs. It's due to a problem with supply in abroad. Actually, these are the ones where we've got a shortage are manufactured abroad. There's a problem, for instance, with a factory in Germany, and we are working very hard on it. Now, replacements are available that have the same drugs in them, but understandably, many women want to stick with exactly the same HRT program that they've got, and I understand that. So simply saying it's okay, there's another brand available isn't good enough. So we are working very hard with the industry to resolve this shortage. It is a very significant problem, and it's come about by a series of factors entirely outside of our control. But what is in our control is to work with the companies to try to get the production going and get the flow going as soon as possible. It's a global problem, actually, because of this problem with the factory, and about 2 or 3 unfortunate things have happened in the supply chain of some of the HRT drugs.
But you're working to resolve it.
Yes, and people should go see their doctor and see if there is what's called a biosimilar, i.e. another HRT drug that is available that does exactly the same thing as your brand of HRT drug.
Okay,
and
again,
you should go and see your doctor.
Assuming you can get that appointment.
Yes.
Just finally, I mean, December.
Look, almost half of GP appointments are on the same day that they're requested. So and that number hasn't changed in the last few years. So of course, I'm trying to reduce the waiting times for GPs and hiring more GPs and using technology, but 48% of people are seen on the day or the next day, and the vast majority of them on the day. So in most parts of the country, you can get a GP appointment on the day if you need it. That doesn't reduce my determination to ensure everybody can get a GP appointment very swiftly.
Okay.
But you can.
But we're talking about that HRT shortage and the concerns about various different drugs. Of course, the decision yesterday of the Prime Minister announced that this Friday the Brexit bill returning to the House of Commons the withdrawal agreement that he's arranged, adding to it a legal requirement that we do actually leave the EU. The transition period is concluded on December the 31st, 2020. No extension to that transition. Of course, that spooked the markets, who apparently didn't read any of the Tory manifesto, knowing that was the pledge already. Yeah. But also raised yet more concerns from the Remainers that we're going to have problems with a hard Brexit.
We're just not, Julia.
Well, there's ridiculous concerns about medicine shortages.
We're
raise their heads again.
We're going to get Brexit done, as the phrase goes. We're going to get Brexit done on the 31st of January, and then we will be out of the EU. And then we'll, of course, be negotiating free trade deals with the EU, with the United States, with lots of other countries around the world. And they can be, they'll themselves be done, and I hope very swiftly. And I'm absolutely certain that we can get the trade deal done with the EU by the deadline that we set out in
So
the
you're
manifesto.
saying no concern, there should be no concerns for anyone about, we've had all these scare stories about children are going to not get their asthma drugs, people are going to die.
No, we're not going to have a no-deal exit. We're going to leave with the deal that the Prime Minister negotiated on the 31st of January, and then we're going to have a free trade deal, and the Europeans have already said post-election that they're looking forward to getting stuck straight in to make that happen. We were absolutely clear about the timetable. The timetable is eminently achievable. The European Union agrees with that and has said so since the election. And we can get on with it. And my goodness, does this country want to get on with it and move forward? Not just people who, like you, Julia, who voted for Brexit and are really keen to see it happen and have felt frustrated by the establishment, holding it back over the last few years. But people like me who voted Remain and want to get it done because then we can move this country forward. And so, I think that one of the things that came through in the election so strongly is that get Brexit done means a lot to everybody who wants to just move the country forward, and now we can get on with that.
The electoral campaign failed because those policies you said were overwhelmingly popular were soundly thrashed by the Tories. So they weren't really overwhelmingly popular, were they? This is delusional.
Well, no. So there's been, polls about why people who voted Labour in 2017. We have to remember that Labour ran an enormously successful campaign in 2017. Yes, they didn't win the most seats, but they won 40%.
Yeah, but never mind about 2017. Let's talk about this recent election. What evidence, on what evidence do you base your statement that Jeremy Corbyn's policies were overwhelmingly popular after the worst defeat for Labour since 1935?
Okay, I was getting to that. So, In 2017, they ran with this policy platform, and it was very successful. Polls show that when you poll these policies independently, renationalising rail, renationalising the water system, taxing the top 5% to increase redistribution and funding for the NHS, they all poll individually very popularly. Also, if you ask people why they shifted from voting Labour in 2017 to voting the Conservatives in 2019, which is obviously they're the people who got Boris Johnson as majority, what most people say, about 50% say that it was the leadership, they didn't trust the leadership, about 30% say it was the Brexit position, and I think about 10 to 12% say it was the policies. So the reason Labour lost this election wasn't because of the policies, it was because of the unpopularity of their leader, for whatever reason. We're going to have a discussion about why that is, and because their Brexit position repelled a lot of voters. So I think the idea that we would go back to the economic policies of Tony Blair would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
But surely it's all encompassing, isn't it? I mean, yes, of course, Jeremy Corbyn was unpopular. It seems the Brexit position was at best muddy. But isn't the overarching reality here, Michael, that people didn't really care much for a kind of socialist agenda? They certainly didn't believe it.
Well, I think there'd be a real danger there in saying that because the Labour Party have lost an election with a particular economic policy which was quite popular, we should abandon it, right? I mean, the reason the Labour Party...
It would be a good idea, Michael, it really would, trust me.
Well, it wouldn't.
It would. You just lost the election by a thundering majority to the Tories. Yeah. How can you sit there and say these policies are popular? They are massively unpopular, clearly.
MPs like yourself stayed in the party and campaigned in an election to get the Labour Party elected, to have enough MPs to put Jeremy Corbyn in office. Isn't it a bit rich for MPs now, particularly the ones who have been re-elected among your colleagues, to say, oh, you know, you were a terrible leader, if they've actually campaigned to make him Prime Minister for the last 5 weeks?
Well, this is very complicated, Julia. You know, I spent a lot of time listening to people, people telling me what they thought, and there was no great enthusiasm for Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn, is the actual truth. In 2017, I think the public, in the end, because Mrs May's campaign went so badly wrong, gave Jeremy Corbyn the benefit of the doubt. I think what's happened this time is they've given Boris Johnson the benefit of the doubt. There are challenges for all political parties and challenges for all politicians, and for a simple solution and a simple answer is unwise.
Congratulations, first of all, for getting back in, because many of your colleagues didn't quite make that. But it's not going terribly well, is it?
Well, more to the point, it didn't go very well last week. Yeah, I'm thoroughly aware of that. Thanks.
No, I don't mean it didn't go very well last week. I mean, it's not going very well now either.
Well, it's kind of inevitable that when you have a massive, catastrophic fourth defeat in a row, that, it's going to be pretty bruising and bloody.
Yes.
Fairly inevitable, I think. And, sometimes I kind of wish we could all go away and do all of this in a quiet space without everybody watching us, but that's the nature of politics.
Unfortunately, that's not the way it works, is it? And unfortunately as well, there's an awful lot of MPs, and I don't know whether you're going to join them, who are now saying that Jeremy Corbyn got it all wrong, he should never have done this, he should never have done that. Obviously, it would have been good if they'd maybe said that before now.
Well, it's always a difficult balancing act, isn't it? Because, look, I mean, every second door in the Ronda, voters who've always voted Labour forever were telling me, sometimes with tears in their eyes, that they couldn't vote Labour this time because of Jeremy Corbyn. And that was, sometimes it was Jeremy Corbyn stroke Brexit. It was a kind of combination of the two. But that was a repeated thing. Now, you could have a go at me for not saying that endlessly for the last 2 years, but I couldn't see what practical purpose that was going to serve, because Jeremy was the leader of the Labour Party.
Yeah, but Chris, you've always been pretty true to your cause. You know, you and I have had many disagreements and arguments about stuff, but you've always said that you would prefer to remain in the European Union. He wasn't able to say that, and I think because of that position of fence-sitting, it did great damage to an awful lot of candidates, because people were confused about what your position was.
I think that was true in the referendum, actually, as well. In 2016, I think Jeremy's position wasn't very clear. I think it's 2/3 of Labour voters didn't know what Labour's position was in the referendum. And maybe if we'd been a bit more urgent in our campaigning then, we might have had a different set of outcomes and so on. But look, this is all crying over spilled milk in a way. What we've got to learn the lessons from what happened last week. And
I think those who say it's all about Jeremy are slightly sort of missing the point, because the thing is, we lost 4 general elections in a row.
Yeah.
Now, we have done that before. That was 79, 83, 87, 92. But we started the work after the 1983 election, and it was still another 14 years that we were in opposition.
Yes.
I remember I went to Frank Dobson's funeral earlier this week, and excuse me, and I was Frank Dobson's agent in 1992, and I remember sitting in the car with him at 4 o'clock in the morning, and both of us in floods of tears, because Frank was the shadow energy minister who we expected to go into government as energy minister, and we would have introduced a scheme for compensating people who'd had chronic obstructive pulmonary disease in the mines. Ironically, 10 years later, I was MP for the Rhondda, and we were only then being able to compensate former miners, and many had died in the interim. So, it is a painful thing when you lose, and the things that you'd wanted to do, you're not able to do. It's not really about the party; it's more about what you're not able to do.
Yeah, but also when you were up against Margaret Thatcher, you were up against a sort of a force of nature and a political ideology, whereas you've been up against the likes of David Cameron and Theresa May, which is by no means anything like as formidable. And the cure for what happened back in the sort of 70s and 80s, late 70s, early 80s, was to turn the party into a party of the centre and New Labour. And that's why Tony Blair got elected in 1997, because he appeared to be a moderate individual. So Keir Starmer this morning saying we don't want to lurch to the right seems to me to be the worst thing he could have ever said.
I'm not convinced about the left-right sort of equation. I think it's more about credible, incredible. Because there were lots of things, for instance, in the manifesto, both in 2017 and 2019, which I think a lot of voters liked, like, nationalising the railways. I think lots of people think that they should be in public hands.
Well, I'm actually one of those people, believe it or not.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. So, I think polling shows that has something like 80% support around the country. But the problem was that in our manifesto this time, it was like we were going to nationalise everything.
Yes, I know. And when you started to look at what the actual...
started to feel incredible.
Yeah, when you started to look at the detail of what was going to change in the economy and in industry, it looked as though we were suddenly going to be looking at a completely different way of life, a very, very different economy, and in a very, very different sort of world, basically, that it was all going to be suddenly, sort of very, very left-wing socialism, which a lot of people don't like.
Well, I was with you until the last kind of bit of the sentence, because I think there are an awful lot of people certainly in my constituency in Rhondda, which has some of the biggest problems of any constituency, not only in the UK but in Europe as well, and incidentally received an awful lot of money from the European Union. But let's leave that to one side for the moment. I mean, there are a lot of my constituents would say, yes, I do want a completely different way of running the economy. I'm not sure that necessarily means that they want BT nationalised, but they certainly want to see radical change in the country, because, we have gross levels of inequality and people living in conditions which I don't think any of us would want to. And more importantly, the most depressing thing for me is people who are in work still not having enough money at the end of the week to be able to put food on the table.
Yeah, there are lots of ways of curing that without necessarily nationalising everything and being anti-business.
I agree. I agree.
But here's an interesting...
My point is that I'm not sure it's about a left-right issue. Or left-right centre, whatever. I think that's a slightly old-fashioned way of looking at it.
It may well be.
It's much more about people's forming their sense of identity, and somehow or other we just didn't manage to chime with that either in 2010 or 15 or 17 or 19.
Right.
So it's not just about in the manifesto and whether it was incredible. Though I think to many people, somebody in the PLP last night said that it was like we were in we'd been locked in the sweet shop and didn't know where to start.
Yes, but also it's been deliberately moved to the left. I mean, you say it's not about left-right, and you may well be correct about that. However, since the days of Miliband taking over, he lost, he said, because he wasn't left-wing enough. So it went more left-wing, and it's actually got worse. So you can only conclude, surely, that the more left-wing you are, the worse the result is, because I'm reading a piece this morning written by the guy who lost up in Houghton and Sunderland South, the Tory MP, who's basically saying that if it wasn't for the Brexit Party, Labour would have actually been reduced to 168 seats rather than the 202 they've got today. So it could have actually been a lot worse. And surely knowing what you know about the new Labour experience, you win elections by being more in the centre.
Well, I think you win elections by being credible. And the art of politics is the art of the possible.
Yeah.
And I think we were offering the sky, and some people thought, well, that's very nice. I like the sky, but I'm not sure that it's yours to offer. But by converse, in 1997, when we won the 1997 election, we were so cautious that, for the first 2 years, we weren't going to do anything about Tory spending plans, which meant that it was terribly difficult to do anything about the NHS in those first 2 years.
Right.
So sometimes it's about caution and ambition. Sometimes it's about the individual, the personnel involved. I think also one of the things that played into this is, we, the Labour Party, made a strategic error in voting for this general election at this time before Brexit was in any sense sorted. We had the government on the ropes in terms of the numbers in the House of Commons. We could have pursued our own policy quite effectively. The government didn't have the numbers, and I have no idea why we went forward with the election. Similarly, people like myself who stormed out of the shadow cabinet in 2016, I think we made a strategic error as well then, because we just gave the impression that it was the Parliamentary Labour Party versus the membership. And that looks like an utterly divided party.
Well, it does, because you've got a sort of momentum-controlled party, effectively, and a very different makeup in Westminster. I don't know if you were at this meeting last night of the Parliamentary Labour Party.
I was.
Can you tell us what the sort of atmosphere was like? Was it acrimonious? Was it horrible? Was it just the business of politics?
I've known much more acrimonious, actually. I thought it was, people were direct. That's certainly true. But there wasn't a lot of name calling or anything like that. Okay. And people from different perspectives were able to put them across. I mean, the thing that really struck me was that we all fitted in the room.
Yes.
And if there had been 60 more of us, we wouldn't.
That's right. And so what is the general consensus about what you do now then? I mean, do you have a big fight about which way the Labour Party now goes? Do you have a big fight about who you now want to be the leader? Does it have to be a woman? Does it have to be two women? I mean, what's happening?
Well, I think a lot of people are considering whether they should stand for this, that, and the other. I'm wondering whether I should stand for deputy leader.
Okay. Who would you be deputy leader to?
Whoever is elected as the leader. I would step aside from.
That's very diplomatic.
It's a genuine position, which is that, to be honest, I think anybody who's going to be the next deputy leader has got to be able to say, you will never hear of any disagreement between me and the leader in public, because the role of the deputy leader is to organise, and fundraise.
Right. And what about the position that you're going to have to adopt on Europe? Because presumably you're going to have a position, whether it is, I'm told, or Jeremy Corbyn has said that you're all going to be whipped to vote against the withdrawal bill on Friday, which seems a bit sort of after the Lord Mayor's show, to be honest, because it doesn't really matter. But is there going to be any kind of formulated proper policy about your position on Europe?
Well, there will have to be. You're quite right. And, as you know, we've had this discussion before. I was a Remainer, I remain a Remainer, and I will remain a Remainer until my dying day. But I fully accept that we have effectively had a second referendum now. Brexit is going to happen, and I guess it will happen at the end of January unless there's some kind of slip in the way the government organises stuff. We will have to. I think we should do proper scrutiny of the bill that comes before us. I've always been in favour of proper parliamentary scrutiny. Otherwise, you would tend to end up with, unintended mistakes. But then there's going to be this next issue, which is what is our future relationship then with the European Union going to look like? Will Welsh farmers be able to sell lamb in Europe without tariffs? Fundamental question for me. And we will have to develop a policy around that. Yes, you're absolutely right. I suspect that won't really happen until we've got a new leadership team in place. I do think that it has to be a whole leadership team. And it can't just be members of the former shadow cabinet.
Well, John McDonnell's already said he's not going to be part of a new shadow cabinet, so you would think that if he leaves and Corbyn goes, you would think that would signal some kind of step change, wouldn't you?
Yes, and the main thing I hope is that all the people of talent in the Parliamentary Labour Party will want to take part in the front bench, in driving the Labour Party forward. sometimes people say, oh, it's inevitable we'll now lose the next general election because we've got to win 123 seats to win, and things look difficult in Scotland. I've written a few history books. I've never used the word inevitable because nothing ever is inevitable. It's just whether you choose to allow the likely to become inevitable.
But you are destined to sit on the sidelines for the next 5 years, probably, aren't you?
Well, yes, but there are clever things that we can do, and we can harry the government, we can harass them, we can intimidate them, we can be a bloody nuisance, we can make sure that they don't get away with idiocies.
You're not going with Ian Blackford's sentiments yesterday, then? When he said everybody should be treating each other with respect.
Oh, yes, we should. We do it with respect, but I think we can still be a bloody nuisance.
Okay.
We should be. The country didn't give us the job of government, but it gave us the job of opposition, and we should do that better than we've done it for the last few years.
Does it worry you that the machinery of the Labour Party now is geared towards the left, and we may end up with the new Labour leader nothing more than Jeremy Corbyn in disguise, the new version?
Yeah, look, if the party members got a historic decision, we've had a historic defeat, they can, if they wish to, choose to get a different face for Corbynism, in which case the Labour Party is dead. It's over. I mean, it's nearly dead now, but it would definitely be over if we get Rebecca Long-Bailey or anybody who's been elected, Richard Bergen, to be a continuation of Corbynism just with a younger face. If, however, the Labour Party decides that the question is, do we want to win at the next election, or do we want to take power away from the Tories at the next election, then it's different, because then the younger people in the party, they're not just left-right. Most of them are young. They need housing to be sorted. They need social care to be sorted for their parents. They need pensions at work to be fixed for all workers.
Sure.
There's so many issues, but they depend on winning. If they decide that purity is better than winning, then the Labour Party is over, and as Tony Blair said, it will be replaced.
Isn't it also an insult to those Labour working-class voters? I'm talking Sedgefield, Burnley, these kind of areas. For the Labour Party to say that actually we're going to give you more of what you just rejected. And many of those working class voters, I sensed, and I come from that kind of background as well, John, are saying, this is not the 1970s. We are not all dependent on some kind of big state Marxist experiment. We're not lab rats for your kind of brand of Labour, Mr Corbyn and Mr McDonnell. And the Labour Party currently ignoring that, it seems, and saying, well, we're just going to give you more of it.